My family has a saying, truth as our only currency. My name is Anya Petrova, and I was the one who paid that bill. For 5 years, I was the pillar holding up our 75-year-old family newspaper, even paying its $30,000 legal debts from my own pocket. Then my parents gave it all to my younger brother Sasha. He was the future. I was just the legacy. They didn't know he'd already sold that legacy to a political propaganda machine for a $50,000 bribe and a new Tesla. They called me a dinosaur. They're about to find out just how sharp a dinosaur's teeth can be. Find out how I used my grandfather's old press to print the truth and burn their new vision to the ground. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The air in the Prosperity Grand Hotel ballroom was thick with the smell of lukewarm chicken breast and expensive perfume. It was the annual Founders' Day banquet, the one night a year the town's elite gathered to pat each other on the back. I was at a back table near the exit, my laptop open. I was live tweeting the mayor's droning speech while simultaneously trying to angle my body so the photographer could get a clean shot of me accepting the Regional Truth Teller Award. My exposé on the corrupt city contractor who'd been overbilling for non-existent road repairs had won, but they'd wedged my award between the salad course and the mayor's keynote. A footnote. Across the room, bathed in the warm glow of the head table, my brother Sasha was laughing. A bright, camera-ready laugh, his teeth perfect. He was leaning in, charming the new city contractor, a slick import from Houston. Sasha was taking credit for the Gazette's fresh digital rebrand, which was just the premium WordPress template I'd spent a caffeine-fueled weekend installing. My parents, Mikhail and Lena Petrova, watched him with a beaming, almost desperate pride. Sasha was their golden boy, the one who'd gone to an expensive business school only to return with a lot of buzzwords and a perfect tan. My father, a man whose hands were permanently stained with 40 years of newsprint, caught my eye as he passed my table. He squeezed my shoulder, his grip still strong. "You are the pillar, Anya," he said, using the old phrase, "Tie Stina. You hold up this family's name. Good work on the award. Solid." I just nodded. I knew what pillar meant. It's the thing that doesn't get to move. It's the one who does the work while everyone else attends the party. My work was this paper. My grandfather, a political refugee who fled a regime that silenced the press, had founded the Prosperity Gazette 75 years ago. His first editorial framed over my desk was just 6 words, "Truth as our only currency." I was the one who lived that. I was the one who spent the last 3 years modernizing the archives, scanning 70 years of history. I was the one who mentored the unpaid interns, trying to teach them real journalism. I was the one who still covered the tedious 4-hour school board budget meetings, because that's where the real stories were. I'd given up a promising job at the Dallas Morning News 5 years ago, right after my father's heart scare. I came home to help out for a bit, but a bit turned into a year, then 2, then 5. I came home to find a paper drowning in debt and apathy. It was my grandfather's legacy, and I couldn't let it die. I became its engine, its conscience, and its only remaining investigative journalist. When that corrupt contractor, the one I'd just won an award for exposing, hit the Gazette with a slap suit, a frivolous lawsuit designed to bleed us dry, it wasn't the paper's accounts that were drained. It was mine. I paid the $30,000 in legal fees from my own savings, the money I'd been setting aside for a down payment on a house. I never told my parents. The pillar just has to be strong enough. A feedback squeal cut through the room as my father Mikhail stepped up to the main podium. It was time for the Gazette's traditional State of the Community address. He looked tired, his suit a little loose, but his eyes were energized in a way I hadn't seen in months. "Friends, neighbors," he began, his voice echoing. "This paper has served Prosperity for 75 years. But a legacy isn't just something you look at, it's something you build on." He smiled, and his eyes found Sasha at the front table. "This year, I am proud to announce a new chapter. The Gazette is moving forward. My son Sasha will be taking over as editor-in-chief, and he has a bold new vision to share with our new partners. The fork clattered from my hand onto the plate, the sound lost in the polite applause. Editor-in-chief. My stomach turned to ice. That was my job. The job I'd been doing without the title, without the pay for 5 years. My job. And partners. We didn't have partners. We were ours. My grandfather's words rang in my head. Truth as our only currency. You can't have currency if someone else co-owns the mint. I didn't hear the rest of my father's speech. A buzzing like white noise filled my ears. My parents, Mikhail and Lena, stepped back from the podium flanking Sasha. They were a portrait of a proud family passing the torch. Sasha, my younger brother, stepped forward all charm and a crisp new suit I'd never seen. He gripped the sides of the lectern, his smile a blinding white. "Thank you, Dad," he said, his voice smooth and amplified, a voice made for podcasts, not print. For 75 years, the Gazette has been a name. But a name in today's landscape isn't enough. It has to be a brand. He launched into a speech so full of empty calories I felt sick. He didn't talk about truth. He talked about synergy, digital-first optimization, and hyper-local content verticals. He was selling them a product, not a principle. That's why, he continued, I am so thrilled to announce that I have secured a major investment from a national media group, Veritas Digital. My blood went cold. Veritas. They see our potential. They see our brand. And together, we are going to streamline operations, maximize our digital footprint, and make the Gazette profitable and sustainable for the 21st century. The crowd, mostly business owners and real estate developers, applauded politely at the word profitable. I scanned the room. In the back, near the exit, I saw Ben Carter. He was a local high school history teacher, the town's unofficial historian, and one of my best sources. He wasn't clapping. He looked physically ill. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly. I was moving. I intercepted them in the lobby right by the main exit. They had to pass the centerpiece, my grandfather's original 80-year-old printing press, polished to a high sheen, a museum piece. Editor-in-chief. My voice was a low, trembling whisper. I was so angry I could barely speak. Since when? You're a business major, Sasha. You don't know the first thing about an editorial budget, let alone ethics. Sasha just rolled his eyes, but my father looked flustered. Anya Sachas, not now. And who is Veritas Digital? I pressed, my voice getting stronger. You didn't tell me you were taking on investors. We don't have investors, Dad. We're ours. Grandfather's charter. It's a trust, not a corporation. Anya, darling, please. My mother, Lena, stepped forward. She put her hand on my arm, her rings cold against my skin. She fixed me with a look of pained exasperation, the one she used when I was a difficult child. Not here. You're making a scene. This is for the family. This is the family, I hissed. That name on the wall is our family. Sasha has energy, she said, her voice dropping as if explaining something simple to someone dense. He has these new ideas, he connects with people. He deserves this chance to build something. The words hung in the air, a stunning, brutal verdict. And what do I deserve? My voice cracked. The pillar, the one who held it all up, the one who paid the bills, who took the lawsuit. What do I deserve, Mom? Her face softened, but the words that came out were the ones that broke me. You are the journalist, she said, as if explaining something obvious and sad. You're our heart. You're the legacy. We are so proud of that. She patted my arm. But Sasha is the future. You'll always have a job, Anya. You're the best reporter we have. Now please, go back inside. People are watching. A job. The word hit me like a physical blow. The humiliation was a white-hot, scorching wave. I wasn't a daughter. I wasn't the pillar. I was an employee, a legacy asset, a heart shah to be managed by the future. I looked at my father, who wouldn't meet my eyes. I looked at Sasha, who was already checking his phone, a smug little smile on his face. A terrifying, cold clarity settled over me. The buzzing stopped. I felt everything. "Fine," I said. My voice was suddenly clear, devoid of all emotion. "He's the future." I turned and walked away. "Anya, wait!" My father called, his voice suddenly panicked. I ignored him. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the hotel and into the humid Texas night. The valet was bringing my car when Ben Carter caught up to me, his face grim. "Anya, thank God. I have to show you something." I recognized the name. Veritas Digital. I've been tracking them. He grabbed my arm. "They aren't a media group, they're a pink slime outfit. They're a political chop shop, Anya. And they're not investors, they're an infection." The Whataburger was freezing, the air thick with the smell of old grease and burnt coffee. It was 2 in the morning. Ben Carter spread the printouts on the sticky table between our half-eaten fries. "Here," he said, his voice a low, urgent hum. "Veritas Digital. They aren't a media group, Anya. They're a pink slime outfit." I knew the term. It was the cancer of our industry. "They're a political chop shop," Ben continued, his finger jabbing a logo on one of the pages. "They're a shell company for a national political action committee. They don't buy papers. They gut them. They fire every real reporter, keep the masthead for local legitimacy, and then start pumping out algorithm-driven partisan propaganda, all of it designed to look like local news. They did it in Pennsylvania. They did it in Wisconsin. They're not investors, Anya. They're an infection. And Sasha just invited them into our house." My hands were shaking. I balled them into fists. Legacy. Future. My mother's words echoed in my head, tasting like ash. The part of me they'd always dismissed as a quaint, dusty relic, my legacy, was the only thing that could fight this. I wasn't just a pillar. I wasn't just an employee. I was an investigative reporter. My entire life, my entire skill set was about following the money, finding the sources, and exposing the truth. My family, in their blind, desperate ambition, had just handed me the biggest, dirtiest story of my career, and the target was my own brother. I drove home on autopilot, the humid Texas air doing nothing to stop the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, the glow of my dual monitors painting my face in the dark. I still had full administrative access to the Gazette's servers and analytics dashboard. Sasha was the future, but he didn't know how to change the passwords. I dug. It didn't take long. He was arrogant. He was lazy. He hadn't just hidden the files. He'd put them in a new folder on the main drive labeled, with sickening irony, New Vision. I clicked it. It was a complete parallel set of books. For the last 6 months, my brother had been systematically juking the stats. He'd been using a click farm service. I saw the monthly receipts from a shell company in Bangladesh to buy bot traffic. Our digital engagement, which he'd bragged about at the banquet as his key achievement, wasn't real. He'd inflated it by over 10,000%. He'd faked ad buy invoices from other shell companies, Prosperity Digital Solutions, Lone Star Media buy companies that I knew for a fact were just P.O. boxes he'd registered himself. He wasn't trying to save the paper. He was dressing it for slaughter. He was fattening it up with lies, creating a false sky-high, digital-ready valuation to get a bigger, faster payout from Veritas. He wasn't a businessman. He was a con man. My fingers flew across the keyboard. This was the what. Now I needed the why. I called Ben. "I need the money trail, Ben. All of it. Who owns Veritas?" While he, my loyal historian, dug into SEC filings and corporate ownership records, I did what I did best. I called my sources. I called the state capitol reporter I'd interned with. I called the political blogger I'd fed a story to last year. I called the woman whose city council campaign I'd covered fairly when everyone else was ignoring her. I called in every single favor I had ever earned. Ben hit pay dirt first. It's a labyrinth, Anya, he said, his voice tinny over the speakerphone. But the money for Veritas, it all leads back to one place, a multi-billionaire ideologue. A guy notorious for astroturfing, creating fake grassroots movements to push his own agenda. He's been trying to get a foothold in Texas politics for a decade. An hour later, my Capital source called back. Her voice was a whisper. You didn't hear this from me, Anya. But Veritas has a standard playbook. I'm sending you the internal memo from their last acquisition in Pennsylvania. They're butchers. My email pinged. I opened the PDF. It wasn't a business plan, it was a cut list, a streamlining of operations. I scrolled down, my heart hammering so hard I felt it in my throat. And there it was. Phase 1 termination. Number 1 on the list, Anya Petrova. Number 2, the only other full-time reporter. Number 3, our 70-year-old copy editor. The plan was to fire the entire Gazette staff, replace us with a half-dozen entry-level content creators, and an AI-driven mill based out of state. The Prosperity Gazette would cease to exist. It would just be a ghost ship website flying my grandfather's masthead, but spreading pre-packaged propaganda. They were going to steal our name to poison our town. This was the plan. Now for the motive. The final betrayal. I still had access to the family business account, the one my name was still on in case of emergencies, the one I'd poured $30,000 into to save us from that lawsuit. I logged in. I searched for Veritas. Nothing. I searched for Sasha Petrova. And there it was. A transfer dated 2 weeks ago before the banquet. A wire for $50,000, not from Veritas, but from one of their shell LLCs. And it wasn't to the Gazette account, it was a transfer out. To Sasha's personal savings account. He hadn't just made a deal. He'd taken a bribe. A $50,000 consulting fee for selling his own family down the river. On a sick hunch, I opened a Zillow tab. I typed his name. There he was. Sasha Petrova, in escrow. A high-rise glass-walled condo in Austin overlooking the river. I cross-referenced his Instagram. A new post, him grinning, leaning against a brand-new metallic black Tesla. The caption, "The future is now. #blessed, #new vision." He hadn't just sold the paper, he sold me. He sold our parents our grandfather's legacy and the town's trust, for a car and a condo. I felt a wave of nausea so profound I had to grip the desk. This wasn't just a bad business deal. This wasn't just my job. This was a desecration. My grandfather hadn't just built a paper. He'd built a shield. A shield to protect the community from lies, from corruption, from men exactly like Sasha. And my brother was handing that shield to the enemy to be used as a weapon against the very people we were sworn to protect. I had to find the last piece, the proof that he knew. I went back to the server, not the new Vision folder. I went into the sent mail of his official Gazette email address. He hadn't even bothered to cover his tracks. I found the strategy memo, a G-doc sent from Sasha to the Veritas board 2 weeks ago. I clicked it. My parents are sentimental, he'd written, but they'll follow my lead. I'll handle them. The real obstacle is my sister Anya. She's a classic ink and paper dinosaur, all ethics, no pragmatism. She's a total martyr. She'll whine, but she won't fight. I'll get her to train the new cheaper staff on local tone before we manage her exit. She'll do it for the good of the paper. She'll fall on her sword. It's what she does. My hands stopped shaking. The nausea vanished, replaced by something cold, pure, and hard as diamond. I looked at the word dinosaur. A dinosaur? I whispered to the empty room, my fingers already flying across the keyboard, opening a new blank document. I'll show him an extinction-level event. My goal was no longer to save my job. My goal wasn't even to save the Gazette as it was. My goal was total annihilation. Dinosaur. Martyr. Pushover. Sasha's words were a drumbeat, fueling a rage so cold and precise it felt like a superpower. He and his corporate vampires wanted to gut my grandfather's legacy and wear its skin like a costume to poison my town. I would not just stop the deal. I would execute Sasha and Veritas in the court of public opinion, the only court my family had ever truly respected. And I would do it using the one thing they were trying to destroy: the truth. The stage presented itself 2 days later. Ben called, his voice tight. "You're not going to like this, Anya. Sasha just confirmed with the school district. He's going to be the new moderator for the annual State of the Schools Forum." My breath hitched. Of course. It was in 2 weeks. It was the single biggest non-football event of the year, held in the 1,000-seat high school auditorium and crucially televised on local public access. It was the traditional role of the Gazette's editor-in-chief. Sasha wasn't just taking the title, he was taking the stage. "That's perfect," I said, my voice so cold it surprised me. "That's our stage." I didn't sleep, I worked. I was an investigative journalist, and I was building the most important story of my life. This wouldn't be a digital file. This wouldn't be a leak. This would be a newspaper. I was going to use the dinosaur tools he despised to deliver an extinction-level event. I began to design a special edition of the Prosperity Gazette. The front page was my ammunition. I diagrammed the entire money trail, a devastating, easy-to-read infographic that started with Sasha's $50,000 fee and snaked through a labyrinth of Veritas's shell companies, ending at the feet of the billionaire ideologue. Alongside it, I put screenshots of the bot farm dashboard showing the 10,000% inflation right next to Sasha's fraudulent analytics reports he'd sent to Veritas. I titled the section, "The Vision," a $50,000 lie. But the how was just data. I needed the why. I needed the human cost. Ben had tracked down the former editor from the Lackawanna Monitor, the paper Veritas had gutted in Pennsylvania. His name was David Davies. I called him. His voice was a flat, defeated monotone. He'd been a journalist for 30 years. Now he worked in PR for a plastics company. "They didn't just fire us," he told me, his voice hollow. "They humiliated us. They kept me on for a month, forced me to train the 22-year-old kid replacing me. He didn't know what a source was. He just aggregated." His voice cracked just once. The worst part, the school board. They had the AI mill generate fake local stories, anonymously sourced, attacking the school superintendent for things she never did. My paper, my name was still on the masthead. We destroyed her. "They're not journalists, Ms. Petrova. They're an extermination service." I typed his words, my fingers flying. The human cost, a ghost ship's warning. Finally, the visual gut punch. I took my award-winning exposé on the corrupt contractor, a 3,000-word piece with 14 sources, embedded public records, and 3 weeks of surveillance. I placed it on the left side of the centerfold. On the right, I put one of the pink slime stories from Mr. Davies' old paper, a 300-word anonymous AI-generated attack piece on the Lackawanna School Board. The headline was "Visceral Truth versus Slime." I had the weapon. Now I had to set the bait. I put on a baggy sweater, didn't brush my hair, and drove to the Gazette. I found Sasha in our father's office, his feet up on the historic mahogany desk, yelling into his AirPods about brand optics. He saw me and muted his call, his face hardening, bracing for a fight. I gave him a performance. I let my shoulders slump. I looked at the floor. "You're right," I whispered, my voice sounding weak even to me. I was emotional. "It's a big change. I get it. You're the future." Sasha's suspicion melted into predictable, arrogant satisfaction. He leaned back in the chair, lacing his fingers behind his head. "Well, Anya, it's about time you saw the light. We all have to grow up sometime." I want to help," I stammered, twisting the hem of my sweater. "The State of the Schools Forum. It's a big deal. It's your first time. I can help you prep." I looked up, forcing a watery martyr smile. Let me handle the boring research. The budget questions, the backgrounders on the board, candidates, the constituent complaints. I'm good at that, right? I'm the pillar. He beamed. It was exactly what his lazy, narcissistic ego needed to hear. The dinosaur was offering to do the work so the visionary could take the credit. Perfect, he said, waving a hand dismissively. Knew you'd come around. God, yes, take it. I was dreading that part. It's so analog. He was already unmuting his call. Yeah, just make it look sharp. Put it in a nice binder I can hold or something. Honestly, no one really cares about the school budget. They just want to see the new boss in action. Thanks, sis. You're a rock. That night, I let myself into the Gazette building with my old key. The main offices were dark. I went to the basement. The air was cold, thick with the smell of ink paper and 75 years of history. And there it was. The old Goss Community Press, the one my grandfather had bought in 1968. The one he'd taught me to run when I was 15. The one Sasha had slated for scrap metal in his proposal. I ran my hand over the cold green steel. Okay, old girl, I whispered. We have one more run. It took me 4 hours. I felt like a ghost in my own life. I cleaned the rollers, loaded the plates I'd secretly made, and hummed the massive engine to life. The thud, chunk of the press was a heartbeat in the silence. It was loud, it was dirty, it was real. I watched the first copies come off the line. The ink was black, the headline, Stark the Gazette's New Vision. A Trojan Horse in Prosperity. I printed 1,000 copies. I bundled them, my arms aching, my hands and face stained with ink. I loaded them into the back of my car, a stack of paper bombs. The night of the forum, the auditorium was still empty. Ben, as a teacher, had left a side door unlocked for me. It was 6 p.m. The crowd wouldn't arrive for another hour. It was just me, the silence, and the 1,000 seats. I took the first bundle. I walked to the front row. I placed a neat stack of my special edition newspapers on every single seat. I worked my way back aisle by aisle, the slap of the paper hitting the plastic seat. Slap, slap, slap. 1,000 tiny acts of rebellion. When I was done, I stood at the back of the cavernous empty room. Every seat had a paper. Every truth had a voice. I looked at my hands. They were black with ink, my grandfather's ink. I smiled. They want a new paper, I whispered to the empty stage. I'll give them one. The high school auditorium was packed, a sea of 1,000 faces. It was suffocating. The air smelled of floor wax, stale popcorn from some PTA fundraiser, and the sharp, anxious perfume of the town's elite. It was standing room only. The public access TV cameras with their telltale red lights were rolling, and on every single seat a newspaper, my newspaper, folded headline down, 1,000 paper bombs waiting for a spark. I was in the center aisle, my heart a cold, steady drum against my ribs. I wasn't on stage. That was Sasha's place. He was electric, a performer. He was working the room, glad-handing the school board president, flashing his perfect white smile. He was the future. In the front row, my parents, Mikhail and Lena, were beaming. My mother clutched her pearls, her eyes shining with pride, watching her visionary son. They looked like royalty, oblivious to the fact they were sitting in the middle of a minefield. Sasha stepped up to the moderator's lectern, which bore the Gazette seal. My grandfather's seal. He tapped the microphone, the thump-thump, echoing through the silent, expectant room. Welcome, prosperity. He said, his voice smooth and confident. Welcome to the state of our schools. Before we begin the debate, I just want to say how incredibly proud I am to be here as your new editor-in-chief. For too long, this paper has been looking at the past. But I'm here to tell you, the future is now. I was already at the main audience microphone, the one set up for citizen questions. I was first in line. Sasha hadn't seen me. He was basking in the spotlight. I see we have some eager citizens, he said, adjusting his tie. Then he spotted me. His perfect smile flickered just for a second. Irritation. Ah, my sister Anya. Always the first with a question. A true journalist, ladies and gentlemen, couldn't even wait for the debate to start. The crowd chuckled politely. I gripped the microphone stand, my knuckles white. My hands were still stained with ink. It's not a question, Sasha, I said. My voice was calm, amplified, and it cut through the room like a surgeon's scalpel. It's a correction. The room went dead silent. Sasha's smile froze. I'm sorry. You're not the editor-in-chief, I said, my voice rising steady and clear. You're a con artist. A collective 1,000-person gasp. It was a sharp, punched-out sound. In the front row, my father was on his feet. Anya, what is the meaning of this? Stop this right now. I'd like to ask you all to please look at the newspaper on your seat, I said, ignoring him, my eyes locked on the crowd. My brother forgot to hand out the evening edition. A sound I will never forget. The sound of 1,000 people as one lifting and unfolding a newspaper. A sound like a forest fire crackling to life, 1,000-person rustle. And then a wave of shocked, angry murmurs as they all saw the headline. The Gazette's new vision, a Trojan horse in prosperity. Good evening, prosperity. I said, my voice a prosecutor's. My name is Anya Petrova. I'm an investigative journalist. And for the last 6 months, my brother Sasha Petrova has been systematically defrauding this community. The digital engagement he sold to his investors, he bought it. From a bot farm in Bangladesh. The new vision. It's a lie. I'd like to direct you all to page 1, the 50,000 lie. The room erupted. Sasha was white as a sheet, gripping the lectern. This is slander. She's bitter. And his investors, Veritas Digital. I continued, my voice rolling over his. They aren't a media group. They are a partisan pink slime outfit. Their plan, which you can read on page 2, is to fire the entire reporting staff of the Gazette, starting with me, and replace us with an AI content mill. They are a ghost ship here to steal my grandfather's 75-year-old masthead, so they can spread propaganda and influence your school board, your city council. The shouts were deafening now. People were on their feet, yelling at the stage, yelling at the school board for giving him the platform. Mom, Dad! Sasha shrieked, his voice cracking, the smooth veneer gone. Make her stop, she's crazy. Don't believe me, I shouted into the mic. You don't have to. Ask Mr. David Davies in the 3rd row. He's the former editor of the Lackawanna Monitor in Pennsylvania. Stand up, Mr. Davies. A spotlight confused swung and found him. Ben must have tipped off the tech booth. A man I'd only spoken to on the phone, a man who looked tired and broken, stood up. He took a deep breath. She's right, he said, his voice raw with a grief that silenced the room. I was the editor for 30 years. Veritas Digital did this to my town. They fired my friends. They forced me to train the 22-year-old kid who replaced me. And then they used my paper's good name to print lies. AI-generated anonymous source lies. They attacked our school superintendent, a good woman. They destroyed her. They're not journalists, he roared, his voice breaking. They're an extermination service, and they're here to do it to you. That was it. The room was in chaos. People were throwing their programs at the stage. My mother was sobbing, her hands over her face. My father was apoplectic, his face purple. You've destroyed this family, he screamed at me. She's lying. Sasha shrieked, his voice a high-pitched, childish wail. She's jealous. She's just a bitter, jealous dinosaur. She's obsessed with me. She's always been jealous. Dinosaur, he'd said it. He'd given me the opening. A dinosaur, I said. My voice dropped, but the mic picked up every cold, hard syllable. The entire hall quieted, leaning in to hear the kill. I held up my own copy of the paper. You're right, I'm an ink and paper dinosaur. But a good reporter always checks her sources. I'd like to direct the entire town to page 4. It's a strategy memo from Sasha Petrova to the Veritas board. His words, not mine. I'll read them for you. I took a breath. My sister is a classic ink and paper dinosaur. All ethics, no pragmatism. She's a total martyr. She'll fall on her sword. It's what she does. I let the words hang in the dead toxic air. I watched the entire room read them. I watched them turn as one from the 20-foot screen to my brother. I watched the weight of 1,000 pairs of eyes land on him, the mayor, the school board, his new contractor friend who was already slipping out the side aisle, my parents. I looked at Sasha. He looked like a cornered rabid animal. I locked eyes with him across the auditorium. You were right about one thing, Sasha. I said, my voice quiet but lethal. I will fall on my sword to protect this paper. I paused. But I'm not falling on it. He was already moving, scrambling. I'm falling with it. And I'm taking you with me. He bolted. He didn't just walk off, he ran. He grabbed the expensive leather binder I'd made for him, the fake one, full of his useless talking points, and he threw it. He hurled it at the main public access camera, the one broadcasting this all live. There was a crash of plastic and glass, and the live feed monitor went to static. He shoved a stunned school board member aside and fled out the side exit, slamming the fire door open. The crash echoed like a cannon shot. Pandemonium. The crowd was on its feet, roaring. Eli was already handing out more copies to the stunned, real reporters from Dallas who'd shown up. I looked at the front row. My parents were frozen, their faces ashen gray. The spotlight that had been on Sasha was now on them. They were trapped in a white-hot circle of public humiliation, 1,000 newspapers in their laps, 1,000 accusations in the air. I stood at the microphone, my knuckles white. I took a single deep, shuddering breath. The air tasted clean. My hands were black with ink. It was done. The press was stopped. I didn't wait for the applause. There was none. There was just the roar of a crowd betrayed. I placed the microphone back in its stand, the metal cool against my ink-stained palm. I turned and walked not to the side exit Sasha had fled through, but straight down the center aisle, back the way I had come. The sea of people parted for me. Hands reached out. Some just touched my shoulder, a silent thanks. Good for you, Anya, a voice I recognized as my old high school principal said. Thank you for telling us. Mrs. Gable from the bakery whispered, her eyes wet with angry tears. I was moving through the chaos I had unleashed, but it wasn't aimed at me. It was a righteous, unified anger, and it was all aimed at the stage, at the front row, at the lie. I reached the front row. My mother was sobbing, a high, thin sound of pure theatrical despair. My father was rigid, his face a mask of purple apoplectic rage. He looked like he was having a stroke. As I passed, my mother's hand shot out and grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin like claws. Anya, she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper meant only for me. You have destroyed this family. I stopped. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then up at her tear-streaked, contorted face. I felt nothing. No, that's not true. I felt a vast, cold, empty relief. No, Mother, I said, my voice quiet but clear, not a hint of a tremor. I just reported the facts. It's what I do. I pulled my arm from her grasp and kept walking. I didn't look back. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the auditorium, past the local cops who were just arriving, and into the cool, humid Texas night. Ben was already on the front steps, surrounded by a mob, handing out the last of the special edition papers, like he was feeding the 5,000. He saw me and his face broke into the first real, unguarded smile I'd seen in weeks. He just nodded once. It was enough. The legal fallout was immediate. By 10 a.m. the next morning, the Veritas digital deal was dead. They released a scathing press release expertly throwing Sasha under the bus. He was a rogue junior partner who had grossly misrepresented both the Gazette's value and his own authority. The billionaire's name was toxic. My special edition had been scanned and uploaded, and by noon it was national news. The Pink Slime Network was exposed. I had stopped the press, and in doing so, I had started a firestorm. I was making coffee 2 days later when the pounding came. Not a knock, a pounding like someone was trying to break the door down. I opened it. They were there. My parents. They looked like they hadn't slept in 48 hours. They looked like ghosts. But this was not an apology. Their eyes were bloodshot with a pure, undiluted rage. "How could you?" my father bellowed. He pushed past me into my tiny apartment, my mother trailing behind him like a shadow. "You humiliated us. In front of everyone. You ruined your brother. His life is over. You aired our dirty laundry in public." This was it. The final moment of clarity. The last thread of hope. I didn't even know I was holding the hope that they might just once see me snapped. "No," I said. My voice was so quiet it silenced him. He stopped his pacing and turned. "I didn't," I said. "He did. You did. You ruined him. You spent 26 years ruining him by never telling him no, by cleaning up every mess, by handing him a future he never earned. You humiliated yourselves by backing a con artist over your own daughter. I just published the truth." "He is your brother!" my mother shrieked, her voice cracking. "You're tearing this family apart. After all this, you'll be all alone. I hope you're happy." I looked at these two people, these two strangers who had called me their pillar my entire life, and I finally understood. A pillar doesn't get to move. A pillar just holds things up until it crumbles. And I was done crumbling. "The family was already torn," I said, my voice ice cold. "You just chose the wrong side." I walked to the door and opened it wide. "Get out!" my father gaped, speechless. "Get out!" I said again, louder. He took a step back, stunned. My mother just sobbed. I shut the door on their shocked, furious faces. The click of the deadbolt locking them out was the first real, truly free breath I had taken in my entire life. The end came faster than I expected. A week later, Sasha was gone. He'd fled to his Austin condo, his new Tesla presumably parked in the garage, leaving our parents to face the wreckage. Veritas Digital, furious at the public humiliation and national exposure, was suing him for fraud and clawing back the $50,000 consulting fee. My parents, leveraged to the hilt by Sasha's vision, were social and financial pariahs. No one in town would speak to them. The banks, seeing no path forward, called their loans. They were forced to declare personal bankruptcy. And the Prosperity Gazette, my grandfather's 75-year-old legacy, was dead. The assets, the name, the archives, the old building, the broken press were being sold off for parts by a bankruptcy court. The Dallas Morning News called again. They'd seen my special edition, which had gone national. They offered me a senior investigative role, a 6-figure salary, and a massive signing bonus. It was everything I had ever wanted. I stood in my apartment, the offer letter in my hand, and looked at the one thing I'd taken from the old office, my grandfather's framed first editorial. Truth as our only currency. I could let it all die. I could walk away finally free and build my own life. But it wasn't just their legacy to destroy. It was mine to save. I called the Gazette's bankruptcy lawyer. Then I called Ben. A week later, I was back in the high school auditorium. This time, I was on the stage at the lectern under the lights. The room was just as packed as it had been for the forum, but the energy was different. It wasn't anger. It was a cautious, desperate hope. I didn't give them a performance. I gave them a plan. "The Gazette is dead," I said, my voice clear and steady. "But the truth in prosperity doesn't have to be." I presented my real plan, the Prosperity News Project. Not a corporation, a nonprofit, a community-funded digital first, but with a weekly print-run newsroom. I put up a budget. I showed them a 5-year plan. I used every grant writing skill I had ever learned to build a case for our town's survival. A local paper isn't just a business, I said, my eyes scanning the crowd. It's a town's immune system. It protects us from corruption. It tells us who we are. Sasha and Veritas. They're an infection. We can either let it kill us or we can build the antibodies. I finished. The room was silent. Then from the back, Ben Carter stood up. I'll pledge the first $500, he called out. Then Mrs. Gable, the bakery owner, stood. I'll match him, and I'll buy an ad for a full year. Then the teachers' union president. Then Mr. Henderson. It was a flood. People weren't just clapping. They were pulling out their checkbooks. They weren't just saving a paper. They were saving themselves. By the end of the day, we had $40,000 in pledges. Armed with that, and my flawless 50-page business plan, I went to the local community bank. The loan officer, a woman I'd gone to high school with, had been in the auditorium. She didn't hesitate. Your plan is airtight, Anya, she said. The board and we're proud of you. They offered my new nonprofit a line of credit to buy all of the Gazette's assets, the name, the archives, the press, from the bankruptcy court for pennies on the dollar. The final loan amount included a new business grant, she said with a small smile, for $30,000. My legal fees, my stolen inheritance, returned. The final transaction was in a sterile lawyer's office. My parents were there. They looked a decade older, hollowed out, their expensive clothes hanging off their frames. They sat in silence, signing the papers that transferred the last vestiges of my grandfather's legacy to my new nonprofit. As they stood to leave, my father paused. He looked at me, his eyes dead, all the fire gone, replaced by a cold, bitter resentment. I hope you're happy, Anya, he said, his voice a dry rasp. You have it all now. I paused, my own pen hovering over the signature line. I looked at him not with hate, but with a final cold clarity. No, Dad, I said, and I signed my name with a firm, steady hand. I just have what we earned, and I'm going to protect it. 1 year later, the air didn't smell like ink and mildew. It smelled like fresh-baked bread and coffee. The Prosperity News Project wasn't in the old cavernous Gazette building which had been sold to a dentist. We were in a bright, bustling, open-plan loft above Mrs. Gable's bakery. The rent was cheap, the floors creaked, and it was the happiest place I had ever been. It was packed. I had 3 young interns from the local community college, 2 grizzled old-school reporters I'd hired back from forced retirement, and a roster of volunteers. It was loud, it was chaotic, it was alive. My grandfather's framed "Truth as Our Only Currency" editorial was the first thing I'd hung on the exposed brick wall right next to our new mission statement. I was at the head of the long central table, a true editor-in-chief, not a pillar. I was editing a piece from our new City Hall reporter, an exposé on the new corrupt contractor, the one Sasha had been schmoozing at the banquet. We were going to print it, and he was going to lose his contract. Ben was across the room, his desk next to mine. He wasn't just a source anymore. He was our community outreach director, managing our membership drive, and my partner. He was currently in a very serious, very passionate debate with our youngest intern about the necessity of the Oxford comma. It's not just a comma, Jason, he argued. It's a moral imperative. This was my new family. The people who showed up, who argued about commas, who believed in the work. The people who valued the truth. Our nonprofit model was working. I'd even gotten a call last week from a group in Wisconsin asking for my playbook on how to save their own local paper from a Veritas-style buyout. The mail carrier huffed up the stairs, dropping the day's letters on my desk. Got a certified one for you, Anya, he said, holding out the clipboard. I froze. The return address was an unfamiliar high-gloss logo, a law firm in Austin. I signed for it, a knot tightening in my stomach. It was thick, expensive. I sat there for a moment, the bustling newsroom fading into a dull roar. It was a ghost from my old life, a life I'd worked so hard to bury. I tore the tab. It was a cease and desist. Sasha. His name was all over it in threatening, bold-faced type. He was suing me, suing the project. He was accusing me of defamation, tortious interference with a prospective business relationship, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He was claiming my libelous newspaper had cost him his $50,000 fee and his future earning potential, which his lawyers valued in the millions. He was demanding a full retraction, a public apology, and a settlement that would bankrupt us. I read the words: tortious interference, libelous, dinosaur, martyr. I looked at the letter this desperate, pathetic grenade lobbed from a high-rise condo I'd probably paid for. I looked at the front-page story I was editing, the one that was about to save the town thousands of dollars. I looked over at Ben, who had given up on the intern and was now stealing a piece of my muffin, grinning at me when I caught him. He saw the letter in my hand, his smile fading. "What is it?" he mouthed. I looked back at the letter. Sasha was still trying to fight me with lies, with money, with threats. He was still trying to make me a martyr, to make me fall on my sword. He still didn't get it. I let out a sound I hadn't made in a long time. I laughed. It wasn't a bitter, cold laugh. It was a real, deep, genuine laugh. The entire newsroom quieted, turning to look at me. I stood up. I took the letter, all 20 pages of its blustering, expensive threats. I didn't rip it. I didn't crumple it. I walked it over to the paper shredder in the corner. "Anya," Ben said, confused. I fed the first page into the machine. The whir and grind was the most satisfying sound in the world. I fed in the rest page by page. Defamation. Grind. Tortious interference. Grind. Sasha Petrova. Grind. I turned back to my desk. The ghost was gone. My team was staring at me. I sat down and picked up my red pen. "It was just junk mail," I said. I finished my edits on the contractor story, marked it with a big, bold, "OK," and hit the button on my computer. Send to print. I wasn't a pillar, something to be leaned on until it broke. I was the press. I was the one who decided what was true, what mattered, and what got printed, and I was free. And so the pillar didn't crumble. She rebuilt. Anya proved that a dinosaur could still have a devastating bite. What did you think of her method? Was the special edition the perfect move, or did she go too far? We read all your thoughts in the comments. If you appreciate stories of hard-won justice, consider subscribing. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.